I'm on the road. I'm paying attention to the road. I promise I'm not touching any buttons over there. But I thought while I had some time, I would share some insights that I've had and some um, awareness that I've had over the last couple of days, really about being in California at this particular time of the year, which is pretty interesting. So, this is Storytime with Sunny. And if you're commenting and chatting, I love it, but obviously I'm not going to be able to read those or see those because, of course, we want to have safety first. But since I have nobody sitting next to me to talk to, I might as well share this story while it's on my mind. So I'm coming back from a mastermind that I did in Malibu for the last 3 days, which was fantastic. Had lots of great awareness, great connections, good validation of some of the things that we're doing in business that are really working and even leading edge, which is fantastic. And the thing that's interesting, though, is me being in California in this particular area. So I just went through San Bernardino, Riverside County. I used to live, many of you might not know, but I used to live in California from the age of 17 to about 21. And those were difficult years, some of the harder years in my life. And it's interesting that I'm here right now because tomorrow, my oldest son, Crew, it is his 36th birthday. And so me being in this space, in this environment at this time is interesting because you know how, if those of you that have kids, you know how when the birthday comes up and you remember all the good things about, you remember when you went into labor and you remember what you had before you went into labor or what you were doing or all those kinds of things. And your children's birthdays kind of bring a lot of positive, exciting memories into your life. And, you might remember some of your pregnancy and things like that. Well, I haven't ever been here that I'm consciously aware of anyway, when it was right around my son's birthday. And since I've been gone, I actually haven't come back here a lot. I come to California, maybe once or twice a year, but I'm generally not in the area of where I lived, which I'm still not. It's about an hour south. I lived in Murrieta and Lake Elsinore in the Temecula area, for those of you that are familiar with that area. And so it's interesting. I'm in Malibu at a mastermind with amazing women, all 6-figure entrepreneurs, 7-figure and 8-figure entrepreneurs. And we had, a beautiful venue, beautiful home. And it just got me thinking about the contrast in life. You guys, 36 years ago, I was preparing to have my first son. I had just turned 19 years old. I was in a relationship with an alcoholic. I was living with him, but I had actually moved out to live with my mom and my dad, because I was super, super sick. And I had developed toxemia in my pregnancy, 4 months into my pregnancy. And that turned into preeclampsia, which turned into eclampsia. And so I was bedridden from 4 months on, and I actually needed somebody to take care of me. And so I moved back in with my parents. And so on this day, 36 years ago, I knew I was, I was overdue, and I had already been induced once, 10 days earlier, and I didn't dilate to more than like a half of a centimeter. And so they sent me home, after 30 hours of labor on Pitocin and all the things, my water didn't break. So they sent me home and said, yeah, he's not ready. And that was on his due date. And so this is 10 days later. Here I am. And I'm like, okay, I knew I was at any time. And then they said, actually, we're going to have you come in on the 25th. And so I came in today and got induced again. I actually went in on the 25th in the morning, early morning, and got induced. And so 36 years ago today, I was in California. I was in San Diego County in Fallbrook Hospital, and I was getting ready to deliver my son. And I had to, because I'd been so sick, there were a lot of concerns. I was on medication to help my blood pressure, because when you have eclampsia, really your blood pressure is so high that there's a risk to the mother and to the child. And so when I went into labor, they started me, I think I went in at like 3 in the morning or something like that. They started me on Pitocin, and I started having really serious contractions, but I wasn't dilating at all. And by about 1 o'clock the next day, so this was like 30 something hours of labor, 32 or something like that, I had a stroke, and my blood pressure went extremely high, and they were like rushed me into the emergency room to have an emergency C-section. And as they were running me down the hallway, I was bleeding because they'd cut me when they were shaving my belly. And I kind of got, I was really nauseous and sick, and my blood pressure was so high, I was kind of in and out of my body a lot. And they said, well, we're gonna knock you out, and when you wake up, you'll have a baby. This was a long time ago, so they didn't do things the same way they do now. And when I woke up, I had a baby. I had a baby boy, and he was healthy, which was great, and I felt relief around that. And I was also nervous and scared because I was a single mom, and I knew I was going to be doing this by myself. My boyfriend was there for the birth, but that was about all he was there for. He was not a present person, being an alcoholic and struggling with addiction himself. And so anyway, so within 24 hours of me, with 48 hours of me giving birth, I ended up with an infection. And the infection was throughout, somewhere internally. I went back into surgery, and they did another surgery to see if anything inside of me. They thought maybe they'd left a sponge or a tool, an instrument of some sort. They'd done an ultrasound. They couldn't see anything, but because I was so infected. And so I ended up with 106.3 degree temperature that I had for nearly 3 weeks. And I was oozing infection from my body that was so painful. I was so sick and so painful that my mother took my baby, and she had to take care of him. Like, I was planning to breastfeed him, and then she had to figure out formula and do all the things. He was in the hospital room with no visitors at all. My dad came in mostly because my mom was taking care of the baby. They wouldn't let the baby come in because they weren't sure what I had, so they didn't want to expose him to anything. And then I didn't have any friends here in California. I had my boyfriend, who came a couple of times, and his mother, who came a couple of times, and that was it. So it was a very difficult, very lonely, very scary time in my life 36 years ago today. And then the following few weeks. So anyway, I had that fever for 106.3 degree fever, which, if you know anything about fevers, after about 105, that's when it becomes risky. Like literally can have brain damage and things like that. I don't know. That might explain a few things. Who knows? But one day, this is where the story gets good, guys. But one day, the doctors came in and they said to me, we're not sure you're going to make it through the night. We've tried everything that we could. We've given you, they've done so many rounds of antibiotics and nothing was responding. They were concerned with me going septic. And they, at that time, they weren't sure what to do. So they actually took me off of the medications. And the doctors, when they came in, so most of those 2.5 weeks that I was so sick with high fever, I was out of my body most of that time, to the point that I had a male nurse during the day most of the time. It was a guy, but I didn't even know what his face looked like. What I knew was what the top of his head looked like, because I literally was like above my body, watching myself be in that state, and I would watch him come in to clean my infection, which by this time was from my breast to my knees. Like my skin had started oozing infection, and he would clean it like you clean like a burn victim. So it was extremely painful, and so I would just check out of my body very often, check out of my body. And so I knew what the cowlicks on the top of my nurse's head looked like, but I actually don't even know what his face looks like, and I can still see him today taking care of me. And so that day, when the doctors came in, they said, we don't know what else to do for you. We're not sure you're going to make it through the night, because it's very difficult to they couldn't break my fever. And so they asked me, because I was a single mom, because I did not put his father on the birth certificate, they needed to know who my son would go to in the event that I didn't survive. And so they asked me to sign my rights over to him, so that in case something did happen, my parents would have responsibility for him. And what that did, remember, I just turned 19, scared, young, very naive girl. What it did, though, was, number one, it created an awareness in me of how sick I really was. And I also had the awareness that I hadn't once, although I was in the hospital, and I had an expectation that being in the hospital, that they would make me better. And I wasn't better, and I wasn't getting better. And that naive, like, I was thinking, this is 1990. Women don't die having babies in 1990. Now, I realize that was a naive thing even to say, but that's what I thought at that time. But what I recognized is I hadn't asked for help. And the reason I recognized that is because that afternoon, early evening, after the doctors had come in and said, we don't know what we can do for you, and we need you to sign your rights away, Archangel Raphael appeared in my room. Now, for those of you that don't know, I had been communicating with angels and talking to angels since I was 13 years old. And so this wasn't something that was like a brand new experience for me, but it absolutely was. At that time, I was so out of my body that it hadn't even occurred to me to ask for the angels' help, to get support, to ask for prayers, like none of that. And so Archangel Raphael appeared at the foot of my bed. My arms were strapped down because the infection was so painful and uncomfortable and itchy that they'd strapped my arms down to the sides of my bed, so that I wouldn't scratch myself and create a worse situation. So Archangel Raphael clearly said to me, breathe in my green healing light and breathe out the infection. Breathe in my green healing light, breathe out the infection. And so I literally, with this emerald green vibrating beautiful energy at the foot of my bed, I literally did that for 12 hours. I would breathe in, and then I would breathe out what looked like a tar almost, like this. That was my visualization, was this gucky tar. And I did that over and over and over again. And then I also asked my nurse to come in. I came into consciousness, obviously, and asked my nurse to come in, and I called all of my family members. Now, I had a lot of issues with religion at the time because I was raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was, sensitive, intuitive, psychic, medium, having experiences with angels and dead people, and seeing and feeling and experiencing all that, but being raised in a very, very controlled, religious, dominated environment. And my family on both sides was Mormon with a few strays. And it was looked down upon. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't accepted in that environment. And so religion to me I had a lot of struggles around religion at that time. But there was something that came over me with the presence of Archangel Raphael and saying, you need to ask for help. That was the other thing, that I was inspired to call all my family, and I didn't care what religion they were, what belief they were. I'm like, I'm dying, and I need your prayers, and I need your love, and I need your healing, and I need your energy, and I need your Reiki. I need whatever it is. And between that and then calling on Archangel Raphael and breathing in the green light and breathing out this tar, I fell asleep somewhere in the 12-hour range. And I woke up the next morning and my fever had broke. And it had broke for the first time in that 2.5 weeks. And the doctors and my nurse came in, and they couldn't explain it. They didn't have any words for it. The one doctor, my Dr. Egan, he said to me, there's no way to explain this. It's a miracle. And I knew how to explain it. I knew exactly what happened. And it was miraculous. And then the next day I checked myself out of the hospital and I went home because I had decided that my fever had broke, and I decided I didn't know if I was going to live or die still, but I was going to go home and I was going to see my baby because I hadn't seen him since he was 3 days old, I think, is when all that happened. And obviously I lived and I survived. Part of the reason I want to jump on and share this story is because, if you've been with me since the beginning, I'm here in California for a retreat for a mastermind that I'm a part of that is for 6, 7, and 8 figure entrepreneurs. And at that time in my life, when I had my son, obviously when you're 19, you don't usually have everything figured out. You're not usually making a lot of money or anything like that. However, in my case, there's so much contrast to where I was then. And obviously that's a lifetime ago in a lot of ways. But I wanted to share with you guys because I'm hoping that this could inspire you. Number one, I literally came back from the edge of death. Definitely had near-death experiences during that time. And I came back. So for those of you that are sick, that have illness, that have disease, that are afraid that you might not find a way, you're not going to make it, etc., miracles happen. But the other thing that I think is even more powerful and more important is if you understand where I was at that time. So yes, I had an alcoholic boyfriend. I was not an alcoholic. I was not an addict. I was always actually kind of scared of that. Not that I hadn't drank alcohol, but I certainly wasn't. I wasn't a big partier in comparison. And so just let me paint a picture for you of my life at that time. I lived in there was a garage, and then they built adjacent to that kind of like a room, and the room had a little like a little bedroom area, I guess you would say. It had a few kitchen cabinets with a sink, and then it had a room with a toilet and a little concrete wall that was supposed to be a shower. However, most of the time we didn't have running water. So those things didn't work. We also didn't have heat or air conditioning. And this is in Murrieta, California, where it would get to 110 in the summer, cold in the winter. And we also didn't have electricity. We would run a line, because it was built adjacent to a garage on my boyfriend's mother's property. So we would run a electric cord to be able to use to plug things in, so that we could have, a refrigerator and a hot plate to cook on, and so that's the environment I lived in, and I left an environment that was, my parents lived in a $500,000 house in Canyon Lake, and I left that because, well, I had a lot of issues with my dad, but I also left it because I wanted to create my own life, and I wanted to live in my own way, and I didn't want to be controlled and told what to do, which is what my dad did. I also didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel deserving. I didn't love myself. And so I found a situation, an environment that was super unhealthy, but matched my energy. It matched my frequency. And so at this time in my life, I'm living in that environment. Then I get pregnant. 6 months into our relationship, I get pregnant. And so then, a year and a half into it, then I have the baby. And I'd moved home so that my mom could take care of me when I was so sick during my pregnancy. And then I was home for a couple of months while I healed from my pregnancy and from the labor and the infection and everything. And then I went back into that situation. I took my baby back into that environment with no heat, no air conditioning, a lot of the times no running water, no bed to sleep on. We slept on the floor. Mice running over us in the middle of the night, because it was literally like built on pallets. It wasn't like a concrete foundation. It was built on pallets, carpet over it, drywall. I mean, it was kids that built this thing, right? Like, it literally was a shack. And that's the environment I chose. And being in California right now, and coming from there, right, at that age, and spending time now as a successful 7-figure entrepreneur, and the contrast of how much life can change, and how it doesn't matter the circumstances you're in. It doesn't matter how terrible things have been, how much you don't have, how you think about yourself, like if you have no value or no self-esteem. You guys, what I want you to hear is that can change. You can change that. And just to continue the story, Um, I lived in that environment with my baby for a year, and it was almost exactly a year later, April 26th, tomorrow. Um, it was almost exactly a year later that it was Easter time. And my boyfriend was a musician, and he was actually a talented musician, but he didn't have ambition. He didn't have drive, and he didn't have follow through. And bottom line is, the reason that we energetically matched each other is we both didn't have value in ourselves. And the hard and sad thing is that his value in himself manifested as addiction and alcoholism and things like that. My low value in myself manifested as people pleasing, as good girl, as taking on projects and paying people to be friends and all of those things. And so over that year that I had my son, my boyfriend, being a talented musician but not having the drive, would also not work. And he wouldn't work, and then he would drink all day. And I would work 3 jobs to be able to try to just make enough to live and to survive. And so I worked in a mail room where you put mail in the slots, and I took my baby and wore him on my back. I delivered flyers to houses for different companies for a penny a piece. I walked neighborhoods and put a flyer on their doors for a penny a piece. That means 100 doors for $1. This was 1990. I worked for an alarm company, and I worked for an answering service. All of those jobs all at the same time, just to try to make enough money, and it wasn't enough. And I also ended up, none of those jobs had health insurance, so I ended up on welfare. I ended up on food stamps to supplement, to get my son enough, to make enough money to have like formula, enough formula. He was a big fat baby, and to buy diapers. And so that was the circumstance, that was the situation that I lived in. And I did it for another entire year. Slept on the floor. My son never had a crib, no dresser, no bedroom, right? Like, it's hard to recognize that person in that life 36 years ago. And I chose it. Guys, I think people, we don't take enough responsibility, and we don't give ourselves enough credit either. And I chose that because I didn't love myself, and because I didn't feel good enough, and because I didn't feel worthy. I chose that. And it wasn't conscious, like, hey, I really want to just fuck up my life and, struggle. But that's what I did. And I felt like I was a victim. So let's go back to Easter a year later, almost a year from when I gave birth to my son. So it's Easter. My boyfriend is playing his music and out with his buddies and drinking and doing all the stuff. And he calls me on Easter evening, or the night before Easter evening. And he says, I'm not going to be home. I'm hanging out with my buddies. We're practicing. We're doing band practice, which was a call that would come all the time. And actually, even back then, I didn't even have a telephone. But he called his mom, and his mom told me. And something just activated me. It was our son's first Easter. And it wasn't that we got along well. It wasn't that we had like this deep love for each other. It's that I accepted the first person that really even just paid attention to me. And our vibration, even though it showed up differently, was the same. We both struggled to love ourselves enough to do anything different. his just really looked bad, and mine looked like I was, like I was the victim, and I was not the victim. So Easter, he calls me, tells me, you guys know the song Beth by Kiss? You guys know that song? Beth, I hear you calling, but I can't come home right now. Me and the boys are playing, and we just can't find the sound. Just a few more hours, and I'll be right home to you. I think I hear you calling, but Beth, what can I do? You know that song? That was Sunny's song. That was Sunny, not Beth. They got the name wrong. So that was exactly what it was on Easter. And I know you guys, I'm not a singer, but I love to sing, and I don't really care if I sound good or not. And I was pissed. It's our son's first Easter. Like, you can't just fucking come home for one, and not that I was religious, I wasn't, but it's just, to me, that's like, okay, this is a holiday that as a family we could go to have a picnic or something to try to create some ordinary, typical life for our child, because he didn't have an ordinary, typical life. He was brought up, unfortunately, I wasn't consciously aware of what I was creating at that time, but brought up in a hugely toxic, stressful environment where his mother was crying all the time and his father was drunk all the time, and we were fighting, and it was ugly. And so there was a radio show back then. Some of you that are in my age range might remember it. I think she's still around. But Dr. Laura Schlesinger had a radio show. And the radio show, you could call in and you could ask questions. And if you called in and you asked questions, then she would answer them for you. So I called in and I got right through. Now, I was crying and I was sobbing because he had just called me like 15 minutes or a half hour before. And then I turned on the radio to listen to this. At that time, I had an AM transistor radio with batteries that I would listen to. And I would listen to her show because I loved psychology. Before I got pregnant, I actually, I'd quit school when I was 15 years old. And I never went to college. But then right before I got pregnant, I took just like a community college class on psychology, and I loved psychology. So I would listen to her. And so I was so excited that I got through, because I'm like, oh, she's going to tell me, what I need to do and how, well, actually, I thought she was going to tell me what he needed to do. That's what I thought she was going to do. She didn't do that. What she did was, I said to her, I told her kind of the gist of the story. I said, I'm 19 years old. I have a almost 1-year-old son. I have a boyfriend who is 20, and he's an alcoholic, and he never comes home, and he never works. And he just called me to tell me that he isn't coming home for Easter either, that he's playing in a band and he's playing his music with his buddies, and so he's not coming home. And I'm so mad, and I just don't know what to do. And I thought she would say, oh, you poor girl, that's really hard, and he's wrong, and da 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 da, and just, I was totally playing the victim card. And the conversation that I had was absolutely a victim conversation. Okay. And this is what happened. So I got on the phone, I told her that, and she said to me, well, there are two kinds of men in this world. There are the kinds of men who want families, and there are the kinds of men who don't want families. And it sounds to me like you have the latter. And then she hung up on me. She hung up. And I was furious. I was furious that she hung up on me. I'm like, how could she hang up on me? I'm this young teenage girl in this terrible situation. I have no choice, no power. That's how I felt. It wasn't true, but that's how I felt at the time. And she's just going to hang up on me and just tell me something like that? Like, what a fucking bitch. That's how I felt, right? I was so mad. And then I picked up the phone and I tried calling her back, and she didn't, and I couldn't get through. The line was busy. I tried calling back for like hours, and the line was busy. But listen to what happened, friends. Because sometimes this is what we need. Okay? What happened was, I got pissed and I cried myself to sleep, as I had many, many nights before. But I woke up that next morning, Easter. My boyfriend hadn't come home, and something shifted inside of me. And what I realized is I didn't need the kid gloves. I didn't need somebody to say, "Oh, you poor thing." Nobody knew what I was living, guys. I didn't have any friends that I was talking about it. My parents didn't even know the environment that I was living in. They'd moved to Arizona, so I was literally a single mom by myself with no support, no friends, no help, and nobody knew what I was living and the environment that I was living in. Absolutely, in this day and age, if somebody would have known that, they would have taken my son. And I understand that now. I didn't know that then. I was doing the best I could with what I had, right? But I knew it wasn't enough. And so that next day, Easter, I took my son to the park, and and we fed the ducks, and I made a decision, and the decision was I'm not doing this anymore. And so I had been already saving, being on food stamps and welfare, not having any money really to my name. I had been saving $5 a week from my paychecks and hiding it in a box that he couldn't spend, a shoebox. And at that time I had 300, I think it was $305, might have been $335, it was something like that. And I looked on, I waited till the free paper came out on Wednesday, and I got a paper, and I said, all right, I'm going to find a place to live. And I went through the classifieds, and there were, within my kind of area, there were like 4 or 5 different people that were renting rooms in their houses. I went to one of them, and it was like a husband and wife in a mobile home. And so it was a teeny tiny room. And when I got there, they were smoking inside of the house. Now, my boyfriend was a smoker. His mother was a smoker. They all smoked inside the house. But I didn't want that. I knew that wasn't good. I knew it wasn't healthy. And so check, that one I had to cross off. I went to another one that was some like creepy guy. And I'm like, nope, check, cross that one off. And then there were 2 others. One of them didn't show up. And one of them, I can't remember, didn't work or something. So I had one, it was 5 o'clock on Friday. Well, actually, I'd gone through those on Wednesday, and I'd looked at them on Thursday. I had 2 left on Friday. And what I decided was one of the 2 of those was going to work. I didn't know how, and I didn't know what, but my boyfriend was gone, as he usually was. So I packed up the stuff we had in my car, and which wasn't much, all the baby's clothes and toys, my clothes. That was all I had. No furniture. I didn't have anything else. And I went to the first place, and that place was an absolute no. And then it was like 4:45 on Friday. I had my $305 in cash in my purse. My car was completely packed. I left my boyfriend's house, and I went to the last house. When I went to the last house, the lady opens the door, and I was supposed to be there a little bit earlier, and I got there late, which wasn't normally like me, but she was like a perfectionist, and she was pissed. She's like, you're supposed to be here at 4:30. I said, I know, I'm sorry. My son needed blah, 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 whatever it was. And so she said, and I had my baby with me. And she said, well, didn't you read my ad? It says no children. And I had looked at the ad, I'd read the ad, and I'd seen other ads that said no children, but I did not even notice that hers said no children. And she's like, yeah, I'm not looking for a roommate with kids. I have 2 kids myself, so we don't need any more kids in this house. She was not real friendly. And I just started crying on her doorstep because it was Friday. It's 5 o'clock now. My car was packed. I had no place to go. If I tried to go to a hotel for one night, at that time, maybe hotels were $50. then I wouldn't have enough money for rent for somewhere. I just started bawling, and I'm like, I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, he's really good. And he wasn't actually really good. He was a very difficult baby. But I'm like, he's really good and we won't be a problem and we'll stay in our room. And we don't like, I just begged her like, and she gave in, and she's like, all right, we can do it for a month. And if you pay me right now, and it was $300, you pay me right now, $300, you can do it for a month, but you're going to need to be out in a month. And so I just said yes, because I didn't have anything. So it wasn't like I needed to, move a whole lot of stuff if I had to move again. And the bed and the room that she was renting had a bed in it already, which I literally had not slept on a bed for 3 years. And gosh, it's hard to say sometimes, And so I moved out that day, and I went back to the house because I'd forgotten a couple of the baby's bottles and a couple other things. And my boyfriend hadn't even come home. He didn't even know that I had left yet because he hadn't even come home. And that made me so mad that, part of what I recognized is a lot of the times when I would say that I was going to leave, it was because I wanted the attention. I wanted him to care. I wanted him to show emotion that I mattered, that his son mattered, that he cared about us. And what I can tell you now that's different than how I felt then was he did care. He just wasn't capable of giving me anything more than he gave. As an addict, he had his own hard childhood with an alcoholic parent as well. He wasn't a bad guy. He was a good guy. He was funny. He cared, but he couldn't care about us more than he cared about himself. And that bottom line was the truth. And so I moved out, and then I did the back and forth for another year. I'd let him in. I'd say, you can't ever come here, but I'll bring crew so you can see him. But I would never leave him with him because I didn't trust him because he was an alcoholic. But if his mom was around, I'd let him have him for a couple of hours here and there. And then what I realized and what I started doing is I started telling him, listen, you have to change. I didn't realize that what really needed to happen was I needed to change. I needed to have boundaries. I needed to speak my truth. I needed to honor how I felt. I needed to change. But I projected it onto him and said he needed to change, which he needed to change too. So we did this back and forth, and he got involved, and I'd let him in, and then I'd push him out, let him in, push him out, and did that over and over and over again. But then at the end of that year, my uncle, who lived in Hemet, California, died. And my parents were going to come to the funeral. They lived in Arizona, and my parents were going to come to the funeral. And I had been telling my boyfriend, hey, if you don't change, then I'm going to leave. And I meant I'm going to leave the state. And I'd been telling him that on and off for, that whole time that I'd moved out. So a year. And then when my uncle died and I knew my parents were coming and they didn't know anything about what I was doing, I called them up and I said, listen, because over that 8 months, I was working those jobs that I was working. And I was taking my son with me. But I also, what happened was that the gal that's room I was renting, that said I could only do it for a month, her babysitter quit a week or 2 weeks into my stay. And so she said, hey, would you pick up the kids from school? Would you get them ready for school? She was a yoga teacher. She was like I am now. She was a vegetarian. She was a crunchy. She did all the things, and was very, very strict about it. And so she asked me if I would take care of the kids, and that she would exchange my rent to take care of the kids. So because of that, I was still working my other jobs. I would work around her kids. I was actually starting to make a little bit of money because he couldn't drink it all away. And so I was able to buy new towels, and I was able to buy some toys for my son. And then I also found a company called Christmas Around the World that that I had started working for seasonally the year before. And what it was kind of like a Tupperware company, but it was selling Christmas items. And in selling those Christmas items, you would earn what they called a kit, a demonstrator kit. And in that demonstrator kit, there were some Christmas decorations and some Christmas toys that I could give to my son. And that was a way that I actually had a few things to decorate our little room with. And that opened the door to starting to have just a little bit of money so I could buy a few things. And so when my parents were coming for the funeral service, I called my dad, and who I did not have a great relationship with. It was very up and down and unhealthy in a lot of ways. But I called him and I said, I'm ready to leave, and will you please bring your truck so that I can come home? And come home. I'd never even been to their house in Arizona yet. But I needed help, and my dad said yes. And so 2 days later, he brought the truck, and we did my uncle's funeral, and then we packed myself up and we moved to Arizona. And my son was almost 2 years old. So the reason I'm telling you all this, you friends, especially those of you that weren't here at the beginning, because it's helpful if you were at the beginning, you might want to watch the beginning to get the whole story, is life is about contrast. And me being here, like I said, I've been to California many, 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 many times in the last 36 years since my son was born. But this particular time, because it was the day before he was born, the day I went into labor, the day that I, really had a surgery that I nearly died from, the memories of all of those things come up. And if you are somebody that is sitting in a place in your life right now where you feel like, I don't care if you're 20 or you're 50 or you're 70, and you feel like this is never going to end, or I'm never going to heal, or it's never going to change, or if you feel like you're a victim, I don't care what it is. I've lived through a lot of hard things. And what I want to share with you, and what I hope that this story tells you, is you can go through the shit, and you can go through the storms, and you can go through the hard stuff, and life is always going to life, right? Life is just lifing. And it's really the perspective that we have. It's the lens that we put on, the way we decide to see things. And this story that I'm sharing with you shows you the way that I saw it as a victim. But then something started to shift inside of me, and I started working on loving myself. I started focusing on self-love, because I realized that I wanted to love myself. I wanted to love my son unconditionally. But I realized I couldn't love him unconditionally because I didn't love myself unconditionally. And so part of my focus was learning how to start to love myself unconditionally, which has been a lifelong journey that I'm not a master at, but I'm sure as hell a lot better at it. And when you start to really recognize why you don't love yourself unconditionally, where you judge yourself, where you're critical, where you're putting yourself down and things like that, and you start changing those behaviors, life starts lightening up. And I'm not saying that hard things don't happen, because there's been a lot of hard things in my life. But I'm saying that you start seeing through a different lens that says, okay, I actually am strong, and I am healthy, and I'm able-bodied, and I am able to function, and I can make choices, and I can make decisions, and I am not a victim. Maybe I have been victimized. I had a lot of people that took advantage of my kindness. I had a lot of people that took advantage of me. And the person that took the most advantage of me was one of the people that's supposed to love me the most, which was my dad. And so, yeah, of course I didn't feel like I was worthy. But if you're sitting in that place and you're feeling like it's never going to change or there's nothing I can do, I disagree. I think it's bullshit. I think that means you're making excuses, and I get it. And we make excuses until we don't. And we get to choose. And we get to choose how long we make excuses for. And we get to choose if we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, you know, in my life and for me, I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I hope that listening to this inspires you. And for those of you that have been a part of my community for a long time, and know who I am now and what I've created in my life, what I've built, what I've worked hard for, the relationships that I've created, and the family that I've created, and the love that I offer and that I have been blessed to receive. You know that contrast is very different. And life is about contrast. So, you know, the hard things help us really appreciate the good things. And if you are or have been somebody that's been struggling or feels stuck or, you know, has been told, you know, I was told so many times, you guys, that my life was not going to, that I was never going to be able to do anything because I had a baby as a teenager. And they were wrong. People are wrong. And I used to say that out loud just because it felt good, but I didn't believe it. And if you need the proof, you can look around. There's millions of us that have been able to change, and not in spite of our circumstances. I think that's a lot of times we think that, well, in spite of this and this and this, you still made it. No, actually, because of this, and this, we've made it, right? Because of this, and this. It isn't an in spite of. So that's story time with Sunny, friends. I hope it brought some value to you. I hope that it maybe helps you to see that if you're sick right now, that you can heal through disease. That there are a lot of different options, and to ask for help. Ask your angels for help. Ask spirit for help. Ask God for help. The universe, divine, source, creator, whatever word you use for something greater than you, the wind, the water, like it doesn't matter to me what your belief system is, but ask for help. When you ask for help, you automatically, just by the invitation, open the energy to receive that which you ask for. It's not always in the form you're looking for. It's not always the way you think it's going to show up, but it does show up. And it's a blessing. So, my friends, I'm still on the road, and I'm grateful. I hope that you got some value, and I love you all. Remember that when we allow our divinity to guide our humanity, then we experience love in its highest and greatest form, which I think is joy. And I believe that we, as spirits in physical bodies, are meant to experience joy. Joy is the highest expression of love. And if this touched you today, then please share, like, subscribe, comment. I see that I've got some commenting a whole bunch in some religious tones. I can't read those because I'm driving, but I appreciate all of your love and light. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your Saturday. And if you have questions about anything that I've been talking about, throw that in the chat. Go ahead and ask the questions, and when I get a chance, I'll come back and answer questions. I love reading comments. I love being able to help support in any way. And also, a quick reminder is we're calling them wisdom weekends. And so I usually do a live on the weekend, well, that's today. But then my podcast is also available on Tuesdays at noon. I do it live, and then we'll throw up the recording. So if you are somebody that enjoys participating live and asking questions live, we have the podcast. It's called Soul Talk, and we talk about real life experiences with a spiritual perspective. So you might enjoy that. It's at noon Pacific time every Tuesday, the live version. And you can also, during that time, the last 15 minutes, I do something called Heart to Heart with Sunny. And Heart to Heart with Sunny is an opportunity for you to bring your questions to me. It's kind of like a Dear Abby, except for it's Dear Sunny. And you could bring your questions to me about anything that's going on in your life, anything you just need some support, some help, some understanding around. And I will answer your questions live on air. For those of you that don't know, if you're watching, is my background. I'm a psychic medium and spiritual teacher. I've been doing that work professionally. I guess this is my 26th year now. So I've been doing it professionally for 26 years, but I have been in the field for 42 years since I had my experience with seeing my guardian angel when I was 13. So if you are looking for some support, looking for some guidance, then the Heart to Heart with Sunnies are pretty powerful. People love to just drop in, and you can ask any question you want. There's nothing off limits. So I encourage you to ask those questions and come and join me live on Tuesday for our Soul Talk podcast. All right, friends. So, hey, thank you so much. I love you all. I appreciate you being here. I hope it brought value. And if it did, please share it. And have a great rest of your day. Happy Saturday. Bye, friends.